Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we're actually talking to Christine Nicholson. She's a multi-award winning business mentor, speaker, and author. She's also an exit and succession planning expert serving clients around the world, located in the UK. So she's got a delightful accent as well. But we are talking about some interesting things today, Christine. And one of the things that we were talking about is how AI has kind of exploded and everybody's using it, from lawyers, business people. And the reality, though, is that this piggybacks on a conversation that we were having about why would they, in the advent of AI, why would somebody still need you in the room? If AI is the tool, a negotiation expert is actually the weapon. And this conversation is really a big one, because to self-preserve yourself in this space of consulting or financial consulting, why does somebody still need you in the room? And in the deal making process, you said something very interesting of like, you know what? I would prefer to have the expert in the room and not the seller. So like, let's start there and kind of unpack from a transaction standpoint. Like, why would you not want the seller in the room?
The seller occupies 7 of the most dangerous inches in the world. And it's the ones between their ears. Because in that brain, AI is supposed to simulate, or is certainly growing towards simulating the human brain. But so far, it doesn't feel anything. It doesn't understand nuance. And it also, AI currently can't reach out and put its hand over the seller's mouth when they are saying something either completely inappropriate, oversharing, telling the buyer an interesting ego-driven story or piece of information that, whilst the seller feels good about it, the buyer is sat there thinking, right, well, the valuation was up here, but every word that comes out of this person's mouth is reducing that valuation and increasing the risk that that I can see in this organization. It is a simple fact that sellers drag a successful sale. They literally drag defeat and sale failure from the jaws of sale victory. So that's
And Christine, you're kind of, you're an expert in the space of helping companies grow and sell their business. I kind of started in the M&A industry, and really right now help people position their companies based on valuations and go to the market with kind of a known number in hand. But in a lot of these situations, what we're seeing is business owners are being approached by people that want to buy their business. Like, it's not the old school M&A or investment banking world where you go to market and you do an auction style process and you get this list of buyers and you do this organized process. It's really coming down to, the other competitor or guy that knows me from the industry associations gave me a call and he's like, hey buddy, you said you wanted to sell. I got some money. I'm looking at buying something. Like, what would your price be? Right? Yes. Like, that's the call that's happening. And yeah. I think the seller, the business owner gets that call and they're like, what would the price be? Okay. And then they call like a valuation expert or a broker and they're like, this guy wants to buy me. What is the price? And the ego starts to make them think that they can transact the whole deal or that they know enough. So that kind of, I think, sets up us to kind of talk about some of the ways that you have even enunciated that a seller can almost unintentionally kill their own deal by some of the things that they say at the beginning that they think is just shooting the, like, hey, yeah, how's it
Yeah,
going? What's
yeah,
your revenue like? How are your sales going right now? And
yeah,
they start talking.
yeah. I mean, and unfortunately, most sellers have never sold a business before. They've heard about the myths, or in one case, one of my clients actually just asked ChatGPT, "How do I sell my business?" And then he actually used the free version and uploaded all his data, so all his financial data, uploaded that into the free version, which now is part of the public domain, and asked ChatGPT to value his business. So, but one of the key, I mean, the biggest one by far for killing the deal or killing the ideal deal and then
Right.
getting something else is just being too emotionally attached and not really thinking like a buyer. Let's face it, the seller is likely to say things like, oh, the business is my baby. I put my life savings into founding this. I've sacrificed family time. I've sacrificed adding money into my pension or my 401k account. My business is my pension. But buyers aren't using any of that emotive language. I mean, buyers are basically ROI, baby. That's all I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come at it with an emotional detachment. So the number one absolute biggest way that sellers devalue or completely lose the deal is because of their emotional attachment, which also comes with three big letters: ego. Because if they have got a decent price for it and they're starting to negotiate on a decent value or valuation, they probably haven't thought about, it's not just the numbers. It's about, is the business saleable? Can the business operate without them being around? Because frankly, most buyers don't want you around, as a seller. And they want to know that they can, how much cash are they putting in? And when are they going to get that cash out? And what multiples are they going to get that cash out? So if I put £1 million in, I want to at least get 2 million out. So when am I going to get the 2 million out? And they're calculating the time value of that money. It's logic and it's mathematics. Sellers aren't thinking of mathematics. I think if you put this in the art world, buyers are very Mondrian, straight lines, or a Rothko, very bright, bold colors, but there's clear delineation. And sellers are impressionist, dabs of paint that you have to stand 15 feet back to really get an appreciation of what it looks like. Those are the key things.
Well, and I think that you've tackled a couple of the things, which is a lot of times they're going to so you get that call and think about what the person's asking you. They literally already know a little bit about you. They don't know the numbers and they're wanting you to give them a price, which means in their head, they have a starting price for what they would buy you for, not knowing anything about you. And
Yeah.
so then from the seller's perspective, you now have to position up what is your value by either showing them financial data or proving up what you are worth. But in that kind of specific space, we now start to second guess, right? We're like, oh, well, am I really worth that? Like it's all me. Like they
Yeah.
could even say how dependent the company is, and all of those things start to tell well, I don't know, my people, my this. The deal is made up of so many other factors that even I will counsel people that when you get that call, you should get off the call as soon as possible. Like
Yeah.
you should literally be like, oh, well, I'll have to have you talk to my banker. Like just make up that you have, like just call it a banker and then get that person into play because you need that buffer zone of like, that's why part of why we're in the room, right? Is to be that shield, that buffer,
Yeah.
because they're like oversharing, and typically that will kill whatever leverage we had in the negotiation because they've told on themselves before it even and the buyer is hanging on every word that
Oh,
you
yeah.
say.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if you think about it doesn't even have to happen in the buying and selling environment. It can happen anywhere in human nature. Is if you hear something that you've liked the sound of, you will really attach everything to that. So if I hear that I can go and buy a new car for £25,000 or $25,000, I probably can't even buy a bicycle for that these days. But all of a sudden now I've got £25,000 in my head. Now it doesn't matter that I go to the garage and I find out that it's 45,000 and I've misheard something. No, my starting position now is 25,000, and I cannot be shifted from that very easily, and it will take more time and effort. So the communication between the seller and the buyer has to be so carefully prepared. And for me, if the client goes in, so for me, most of my clients are the sellers. And if the client goes into the process, and I don't mean into the room, because frankly, I would lock them out. But if they go into the process, and for a start off, they know what's going to happen. So way before they actually know all of the individual component parts, and they know why each individual component part is important, and they're prepared for those individual component parts, then all of a sudden, actually what we're doing is de-escalating the emotional attachment. Because what we're doing is it's a bit like puppy training. Actually, there's no such thing as puppy training. It's owner training. It's just that nobody would buy classes to owner training because everybody thinks, well, I can control myself. But the minute you're with that puppy, you start behaving in a way that you would not if you weren't a puppy owner. So, and the actually a puppy and a business, same thing. From an emotional attachment perspective.
Well, and I kind of agree with you. There's something, like you're going about your business and you've just been focused on growth and I'm never going to sell. I'm going to, because most buyers really don't think about selling. They just think about growing, and then dying. And they don't care what happens to the business, right? Like, I'm going to work till I die because I love this. So then the call comes, and what happens is they're like, oh my gosh, a deal could be coming in my lap. Yes, those are the best deals, but those are also the most precarious because you don't have the buffer of other buyers sitting there and shifting up that. Now you are having a negotiation that is based on truth and knowledge and symbiotic, which means that you can't just dictate the deal. But this is where I think that some of that fear and scarcity mindset starts to show up, because now we're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose this deal. This is a good buyer. Like I want to do, and that is also going to show up in like the feel of the negotiation. It's going to look like, it's going to feel like desperation, even if it's excitement. So how do you kind of help them reframe this or deal with it so that they can be more confident?
So the first thing that's really important is if you have been approached, so an unsolicited offer, then you've already got somebody who is interested in, and usually you've already known them. It's very rare that you get an unsolicited offer from somebody, complete random stranger. So you've already known them. So you already can decide immediately on the receiving the offer whether this is someone you actually want to sell to. Now, being ready for that before you receive the unsolicited offer, which is most of what I do actually, which is the exit planning side of things, which is making sure you understand your value, making sure you know what you want, and just actually knowing those two things means that you're already sitting in an environment where this should be a win-win. Somebody wants to buy and you want to sell, and now it's just a matter of terms, and you can win more comfortably. I don't mean by screwing someone over, but you can win more comfortably by literally just having that preparation before the offer comes, having thought about these things before. The worst thing is when you get an unsolicited offer and you think, oh, this is a really good deal. And then you start to see, because you've not done any preparation, you start to see that there are some cracks in your business that you're going to have to expose to a buyer. And now you start getting defensive. That comes across as being desperate. And the more defensive that you are as a seller, and the more desperate you look, the more exhausting it is. And I have seen sellers get almost to the end of the deal, and they've literally ruined the deal throughout by oversharing, by being emotionally attached, by being defensive about some of the questions that are being asked. So now the buyer is seeing massive risk, but still wants to buy the business because they know fundamentally it's got it's got the bones of a good business that they can bolt onto their existing business. And the buyer gets into the position where they're not just desperate to keep hold of the seller. Sorry, the seller gets into the position where they're not just desperate to keep hold of the buyer. They're also, what's going through their head is, I can't go through this again, because they're emotionally drained. They've found it exhausting. They found it really stressful. If they're involved in the day-to-day, they've generally been doing a full-time job of trying to run the business. So they can already see that performance is generally, business performance is dropping. They now know that selling a business is a full-time job, which is something they don't want to do ever again. And so they literally, when they do actually get the deal finally across the line, they've got a worse deal on worse terms, less cash on day one. Usually they have to stay in the business for longer than they want to, and they're bloody exhausted. Like they're literally just absolutely frazzled. And
and in that kind of situation, the buyer towards the end of the deal comes in for the retrade, and they start to renegotiate the deal because they know that the seller is tired. They know that the seller has been too emotionally involved, but that typically is because there was no planning in place. Because I have a different example to tell you, is that I have a client that does valuations every year. And when we went to do the valuation this year, they said we had an investor come last year and invested in the company. And I was like, you did not call me. What is going on? And I was like, well, what happened? And they're like, well, they came in and wanted to invest at $40 million valuation. And I was like, well, what was the prior valuation? They were like 35 million. And I was like, okay. So they're like, so when this guy came in and wanted, just to purchase, it was like a partner coming in and wanted to purchase a small amount, we said yes, that the 40 million would be reasonable. And we just had our lawyers write it up and we went forward with the deal. Now that was a lot easier. And I was like, oh, okay, well, great. So now we need to value it this time, but we have that market transaction that came in because the market was willing to pay more than what we had at fair market value, which was the 35 million. And so for them, they could just easily transact it. Like we knew it was above what we thought it was before. So it seemed like a great deal to begin with. If you don't know that basis, somebody could say any number, and you now have to go back and take weeks of process to even respond to that offer, because now I got to get somebody to value it real quick. Well, you can't get a valuator to do it real quick, right? They're booked. Like they don't have time. So in some of those types of situations, I think that, you've kind of talked about some of this, but, in prepping them to be able to talk in a negotiation, in my mind, if they've gone through some sort of valuation process, they understand, like even the valuation process allows them to understand the skeletons in the closet that they need to clean up, and how to talk about some sticky ickies in their business, in their financials. They have already had a person come through and say, what the heck did you guys do here? And they've had to find those answers. And so that's one way I see them prepped. But how else are you seeing, besides or in addition to knowing your numbers, how can they be ready for that negotiation?
Well, the first thing is they got to open those cupboards with the skeletons in. Well, somebody has to. Certainly one of the things that when I'm working with clients, the first thing we do is evaluation. We want to know where you are right now. And we'll do a standard valuation process, and I give them 4 valuations based on different criteria. And we look at their financial performance because, at the end of the day, buyers want ROI, and that's, at its most basic level, cash goes in, when does it come out and how much does it come out? We need to show that. And then you've got, okay, how easy is this business to actually operate and grow or scale or bolt into whatever they're already building? Because buyers only buy for 3 reasons. They buy because they want access to your customers. They buy because they want access to your capability. You do something that they don't do. Or they buy access to your capacity, i.e. they already do something that you do. And the fastest way to go from a 10 million business from 5 million is to buy another 5 million business. So with those 3 things in mind, we actually get certainly I get my clients to really think about what the opportunity is. And this is, sometimes it means actually getting them to sit in a different chair in their boardroom. I know this sounds like fairyland, but if you just sit in a different chair in a room that you're often commonly in, it actually changes the way you think. So I want you to, so if you're sitting here in the boardroom normally, that's your seller chair. I want you to go and sit on the opposite side of the table, and I want you to start thinking like a buyer. So I've got something in my business, it ain't quite right, and I haven't fixed it. This is as a seller. I want you to present that to the buyer as, well, here's the opportunity. And rather than present them with a problem, it's like, so here's the opportunity for you to actually add value to this business. Because I know that if we fix this, and if we'd fixed it 3 years ago, that my business would be being sold for a significantly higher value. So you just look at all of the things that can add value really quickly, because if you show the buyer that as a seller, you understand where those opportunities are, as opposed to shut them in a cupboard and hope that the buyer doesn't ask the question. Because here's the deal. Buyer's always going to ask you the question that you don't want to answer. 100% guarantee it. So you're actually presenting those as opportunities. The other thing I would always say is less is definitely, less is more. So, and we spoke about this before we came on here, which is you don't have to fill every moment of silence. You are going to be, think of this as a courtroom. You are going to be asked a question. You need to answer that question as fully and directly as enough for the buyer to make a de-risking decision about it. And then your absolute best weapon is shutting up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was telling you, one of my clients, ex-forces, and the way that we used to get him to shut up was I used to literally stick a pin in him. Because one of the things I learned when I was very young is the pain response is faster than the thinking response. So if he was starting to give any indication that he was going to obfuscate, because it was like tell a story that had no relevance, open up and share about something that was completely irrelevant to the business today, I'd just stick a pin in his leg. And not many of my clients actually would let me do that, but that was the thing that worked. But it was definitely a more subtle way than reaching hand and putting my hand over over his mouth.
And I think that because I was in mergers and acquisitions for so long, I saw how kind of toxic it was in the negotiation process, where you're just volleying back and forth and arbitrary numbers, as opposed to, I think, if you prepare the client for actually role play the discussions that are going to have to take place. Because the dynamic that I've seen when you get the call from another competitor or industry player is what happens is now we have two owners that are trying to negotiate together, right? They're being told by both sides that they need to have experts in play to help them, but they're both a little egotistical about the situation. So now for the buyer, that's okay. Like if they go rogue and they don't listen to their experts, then they're probably going to pay too much. Like that's what they're concerned. Like their people are concerned with them paying too much. You don't have to worry about that. That's a great situation for you. But it means that when we go into negotiations, I will tell my client they're going to want to talk to you. So I need you to be able to say this very succinct thing. And then when they ask a financial question, it does not matter if you know the answer or not. You are going to look to me and you're going to be like, you know, Melissa would be great at answering that question. And you're going to hand the power to me. And if it needs to be handed each single time, that they're going to then look at you again and say, well, you know, like, what's your facility? Like, how many square feet do you have? You know, Melissa would be great to answer that until the default is that I am answering all questions. And then when I say to the owner, you know, Bob, I think you could answer that. That is my sign that you are now allowed to speak, right?
Yeah.
But you're allowed to speak about that particular topic. And I think that that is kind of leads into maybe you have some other examples of when when we're in the room, you want to use us as a shield. Like we are to create the answers to the questions in a very methodical manner that portray it as an opportunity. You know, like, yes, I know this client doesn't have a website, but that's an opportunity for you to be more active online and exponentially grow the business, right? As opposed to your guy would be like, yeah, that dang internet, I'm so I don't even want a website, you know, like, okay, that's a little. So when do you see silence working best, or that you have to kind of take control of the narrative? And how could a seller be more prepared to put their ego aside for those negotiations?
And this is actually a really easy one, because with all of my clients, we have a robust conversation before every meeting. So typically the seller's due diligence team will want to come, and so they'll have done put my teeth back in. They will do the financial due diligence. And then they'll do the legal debt. So they'll do the due diligence. And typically, they won't have one team doing it. They'll have different individuals doing each of the pillars of due diligence. And one of the most chaotic sale processes I ever got involved in really taught me the value of single agenda item meetings. So if you're going through due diligence, it is common for the seller to ask questions about one particular subject and then go, well, while I've got you here, which means that the seller then is actually being asked questions about 15 different things. And it's a bit like politicians who go on news programs. And a politician will typically go on a news program to either promote their big win or their new policy. And then the newsreader will say, and while I've got you here, can you just comment on? And a really good politician will say, well, I'll defer you to my colleague who has been fully briefed on this and knows the ins and outs and the why-fors. And the really good politicians will do that. Unfortunately, sellers, like I say, they only sell one business. They've never sold one before. They've not really, they go with the flow of the buyer's needs. And what I always train my clients to do is, no, this is your deal. You are a peer in this process. So each meeting is going to be about a single factor of, if we're talking about financial due diligence, we're not getting involved in the legal or the corporate or any of that. We're just going to talk about finance because that's the thing that we're going to be prepared for. And you're only going to answer the questions that I'm going to give you the nod to answer them. So typically when we're within the room, the seller, the buyer will ask, or the buyer's team will ask a question, and all of my sellers will look to me and they'll say, and I'll go, then I think actually the right person to answer that is this person. And if there's multiple representatives of the sellers, and if they go off topic, I have no qualms about jumping in and saying, hold on a minute, this meeting is about this subject. That is all we are going to talk about. And I just want to keep it really clear and clean so that we don't end up off topic. And ultimately, it's really about preparation. Now, the downside of this type of process is it takes a bit longer in terms of the amount of time, and it takes more meetings, but it significantly reduces the stress that the seller is feeling. And actually, it increases the clarity of the information that the buyer gets, which means the actual process is not so contentious.
Right.
And the ultimate deal, the buyer will always think, could have probably paid a bit less, but I'm happy. And the seller will always think, might have squeezed a bit more out of this, but actually I'm really happy with what I got. And everybody goes away feeling like they got a win.
Yeah.
But sadly, in 75% of all the sellers walk away thinking, oh my God, how did I sign that deal? And they've got some form of regret.
Well, and I think that when you're doing these types of deals, you usually have a person like the seller who's selling their only company. The buyer may have bought another company, like they may have some limited experience. But what happens is, another thing that we try to put into play is a weekly meeting. And so the weekly meeting is with the buyer and seller. One thing is it does start to facilitate the relationship so that they start to, communication patterns start to evolve. They start to realize there's two cooks in the kitchen. Even your analogy of sitting at a different place at the conference room table, it's like mindset is you're not going to be the head guy anymore, our head lady. Like, you have to start shifting out. But that weekly meeting can be very targeted on one topic, on one issue in due diligence. The next meeting could be about another issue. And then as you get closer to the deal finishing, there's going to be weekly things of okay, did you get back to the attorney about this? Did you transfer the bank accounts? Do we know where the new accounts are going? Like, all of it at the end is this huge, transition that culminates on one day of signing the deal and handing the keys over. But there's so much that goes into it that weekly meeting, if it was very focused, I love this concept, because you then have a seller that's prepared to talk about one topic. If it goes off topic, which is what a buyer would do to kind of manipulate you, you just stop it and you say, no, we will table that to the next meeting. Are those the two topics that you'd like to talk about for the next meeting? Great. We will be prepared for that. And this is the information. Oh, you need this information beforehand? Great. We will give that to you. Like, then the expert is really guiding you through this process, which I think is some of the things that, as we're the shield, what we're doing is trying to prevent you from kind of rushing through this like, oh my gosh, they want to buy me. Yes, let's do it today. Woo! And then it's like, slow down. So what else are they giving away too early? Because you talked about at the beginning, even when I start to say, oh, this business is all me, to a buyer, that's like red flag, like lower value. You don't have a team. You don't have process. You don't have manuals. Like, what else is the seller unintentionally giving away kind of this bad information that could lower their deal price?
Yeah. I think the key one is letting the buyer know that this deal means more to them than anything else. So, the key things is saying, well, I hadn't really thought about selling my business. So never, ever say this. I hadn't really thought about selling my business. So this deal has come along at the right time. And it might sound like an innocuous thing, but actually what you're saying is, well, you're the only guys with the hat in the ring. And that actually then puts all the power onto the buyer, and they're going to, if they're a sophisticated buyer, then typically they're going to be putting all of the pressure on. The minute that they realize that, the minute that a buyer realizes that the seller is basically naive, then they can pull every trick out of the book in terms of manipulating perceived value. And a lot of those things will be making things like making the due diligence process really long and hard, and then price chipping right at the very end. So one of the key things that a seller can do to not give away these things right at that, that opening conversations, is to make sure that those opening conversations are as if there's 3 or 4 bidders. So you get it into, as a seller, get it into your head that there's potential bidders, because there might only be one offer on the table right now, but this is preparing you for perhaps introducing other potential buyers.
Right.
So actually giving away that power of, because it'll be a casual conversation right at the very beginning that then becomes almost like a desperation at the end, because there is only one person involved.
And I'd like to give a tangible example of what that is. Like, we had recently somebody who said, a great buyer who's contacted me over and over wants to talk about, and I'm ready to talk to them. And he said, I want to start that conversation, but I also had a couple other people who have reached out to me over time. And I said, well, we should engage all of them at the same time to kind of push them all forward. Like, hey, you requested in the past. And so now we have several buyers in play, even though the first one was the only one that initiated contact, right? So that's an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I have another good example of an unsolicited offer. So a couple of clients at mine actually just contacted me. So I already knew these guys, and they had a great little business. There was just the 2 of them. They'd only been going a couple of years, but they were growing. They were going really great. This was a lifestyle business. And they had thought about really growing it, but then they thought, people, scaling is like hard work, and it's going to make life hard. So we're really happy with where they are. Then this offer came in. And the only thing that they'd thought about was that if they sold their business, they had a number that each of them would get in their bank on day one. That's as far as they'd thought about in terms of ultimately selling. And so they had no idea what the value was. And so when they got the offer, the first thing they said to the buyer was, oh, wow, this fits exactly what we would expect. This is perfect for us. Anyway, then they realized actually they didn't know what to do next. So they hadn't accepted the offer. And so they got me involved. And so I rang the potential buyer, and I said, I know that you've bought lots of businesses before, so I know you've got a process for this. So you've given a kind of quick email saying, we're kind of offering a ballpark figure of this, which is multiple millions. It wasn't a small amount of money. I said, so why don't you just send me over your boilerplate template offer, including all the other things that you would typically include in a deal like this, so that we can actually get an idea of whether this is something we want to step forward with. Well, the boilerplate, which they should not have sent me, but that's another story. When I explained to the guys that, the headline number was going to result in a particular day one cash and having to work in the business for another 4 years for a salary, work full time, which they weren't doing, and grow the business for these other guys. They were like, this offer isn't sounding quite so good now. I said, but hold on, let's have a look at your numbers, because what's the value of this business really to this buyer? And because they hadn't thought about the value, they'd just seen the headline number from the buyer and thought, oh yeah, I can't believe it. Yes. Anyway, it turns out that the business was actually worth nearly £10 million, probably about $12, $13 million more than the offer on the table.
Wow.
So these guys, when we actually showed them this is what they should be selling it for, they were really comfortable to go, do you know what? I'm less excited about this offer now. And we'd really like to stay friends. And, we're not ready to sell because we got stuff to do. And they went from 2, I think they're now a team of 6. And their valuation is, it's quadrupled. They have a fantastic business. The great thing is they know what the journey is going to be. They know if they get another unsolicited offer, they'll be ready for it. They are still working effectively 3 days a week. And they have a very clear idea of what they needed to do to make the business worth more, which they've done. They know what they should also do to make it worth even more, but they don't want to. And they know how to present those things as opportunities. And they know what the value of their business is to that kind of buyer. And now they know about 8 actual individual potential buyers who when they are ready, they can go out to. And they now have an advisor that they know is going to sit in their corner and fight for them. So,
yeah.
But the relief that not leaving 10 million on the table, I think I would feel a little nauseous.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of times you wouldn't know about that until the end, or you'll never know about that.
Yeah.
Because I think that, when people talk about exit planning or strategic planning, part of it is to be able to have those calls come through and to be able to play poker and to be able to not even play poker, to have it be so second nature. Because again, I just encourage, people to really put yourself in that buyer's perspective. So you go and you yeah, I want to buy this car. And you walk up to the lot and they have the car for sale for this amount. And you're like, you know what? I want to buy it for $20,000. And they're like, you can have it. And you're like, what? I'm getting screwed, because it's a psychology that we want to be in that go back and forth. So even if you hear a great offer, you don't know what it means after taxes. You don't know what it means after, expenses. You don't know what is being held back at the end of the deal or what could be exchanged for stock. Pressuring that deal, even if you like it at the beginning, asking questions to clarify some of those pieces, like, what does this really mean? What does this entail for me working? What does the employment contract look like? All of these things are how you can find some of those issues in the deal or not. But you need to be able to play poker, and nobody wants a quick deal. That will make everybody feel like they're getting screwed. But if you know your numbers and somebody came to you and been like, we were talking a few years ago and you said you might sell your business for $10 million. You could clearly be able to say, well, that's not what it's worth right now. We look at business valuations every year, and I clearly know that that's not the number right now. The next question they're going to say is, well, what's the number? And you can say, that is something that we would obviously need to re-update for a current date. And I would love you to talk to my advisor, because any offers, because we do get a lot of offers coming through, but any offers we usually just handle with the same person so that they can, provide the information that you need. Now, if that response comes through, they're like, oh man, this is not an unsophisticated seller. This seller knows all of these things. And even if it's a perspective, even if it's just a, concept, and now you have to go back and be like, hey, I said we have a process, but do we? Odds are, if you have somebody in play that's looking at the value every year, that should also be somebody who could guide you of how to exit. Or now you pull in the team that you've already identified would be that negotiation piece. But a valuator is good. A valuation negotiator who can use, we use a lot of times, maybe you do too, we'll use market transactions to say, look, here's the value. We sometimes even will position the number and give it to the rest and say, here, based on the market, We believe the value is between 1 and 1.5 million. You know, we're requesting offers by this date. And now they know what the framework is. And if they really want it, they maybe should be above that high number, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if they are below the lowest number, they know that they may miss out on that deal. So, you know, we don't have to hold everything back, but you need to provide it in a process. And what that does is anchor the deal at a number that you believe is rational for the business. Why would you ever negotiate anything less? You would always negotiate more, but you're giving them the floor. Now, that is a little controversial, I know, in this space, but it is something that we position out there as a way to lead from. And again, this is two people who know each other, right?
Yeah.
And other very close buyers that I don't want to start that negotiation at you trying to figure out how low you can go and my guy being upset with those first offers, because that could easily happen when they get those. Like, how do you get somebody to be unemotional as these offers start coming in?
Yeah. And a lot of people get emotionally attached to the headline numbers. But like the guys who could have left 10 million on the table, you know, the thing that crushed them was the fact that they would have been happy to sell for the price. What really crushed them was all of the other terms that would have never have come across in that headline offer. That these are the things that would have turned up later in the deal. You know, it's like you can have a headline number. Let's use 10 million as a number. You can have a headline number. I'm selling my business and I'm going to sell it for around 10 million. But actually, it was the real price, because it's how much longer do I, if I'm an owner manager, how much longer do I need to be in a business? What cash am I going to get on day one? What deferment am I going to get for any potential liabilities that are active within the business right now? What commitment do I have to get my senior management team to sign up to? Because frankly, I've always had them on 1 month's notice, and I still can't get over the fact that in America you have 2 weeks notice. It's like 2 weeks notice? No, not long enough. Because there's this big fear that if you have long-term contracts, that it'll cost you if you want to get rid of them. But actually, if you're already thinking of getting rid of some people, you should have fired them already. Like, the time to get rid of people is the minute you think about it, because generally that situation ain't going to get any better.
Right.
So all of the other, you know, like moving parts, and one of the things that often gets, and it certainly doesn't catch my clients out because I'm quite upfront about it, but is the amount of money that the cash that has to be left in the business for this working capital calculation, for example. So if you've got a business that's got a big working capital demand, perhaps because the financial performance, the financial processes and systems aren't quite as smooth as they could be, then that's basically you leaving cash and value on the table. Like, if you can be aware of that as part of your terms right at the very beginning, you can groom your business through the pre-sale process. You can start working on that now. I always think you don't actually need to make your business worth more. You don't necessarily need to generate more revenue or even generate more profit. One of the quickest ways of improving the amount of cash that you're going to get on day one is just improve the way you manage your working capital and stop being bank of your suppliers and get your customers to pay you faster. So yeah, but of course, if you
and working capital is a big negotiation tool. That's usually where we'll see a retrade or a renegotiation. And I've told this on another podcast. I think we had a client that came in and they're like, it was like a $3 million deal. Okay. And the working capital requirement was a $1.5 million adjustment. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And I was like, it doesn't. It's wrong. And they're like, we can't figure out how to negotiate with them because we don't know how they figured out the working capital. And so they were doing an average of the past, and that's what they said. They wanted to keep it at the same level. And
Yeah.
so we got on a call, and they paid me a lot of money to come on this call. And within 15 minutes, I was like, well, that's all I need to know. And we get off the call, and they're like, what the heck happened? And I said, they forgot to put in all the accrued expenses. And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, all they have to do is go, you just like, I didn't want to expose it in the call, but I was
Yeah.
like, just go ask them to add in all of the expenses that they haven't put in. They put in all the payables, they put in all the, but they, like they didn't accrue the expenses. They go in and they're like, oh yeah, we were willing to do a 200,000 adjustment. So we went in at 175 and they agreed to 200,000 as opposed to, and again, the deal didn't make sense. You would never have that much of an adjustment for a deal that size, but
Yeah.
nobody could figure it out. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just having somebody in there that can like, instead of you fighting of like, no, I don't want that number, you
Yeah.
have to come in with proof of why your number makes sense, because they didn't prove out why their number makes sense.
Yeah.
They were just a big accounting firm that was just like slapping numbers on things. And I was like, hey guys, you missed a couple numbers. And they're like, oh, thanks for the catch, Melissa. You're right. It changed it dramatically. I
Yeah.
know. And everybody's kind of saved face, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, in some ways it also appeared, but everybody was kind of able to dial it back. And I think that that's a key is, once you sign the contract for this deal, you are going to be involved with them for at least 6 months to potentially a year. Most people don't walk away that day.
Yeah.
And so that relationship is what we're trying to preserve in
Yeah.
this negotiation. It's not an old school, used car salesman process. It's really a calculated move with financial information backing the numbers, and then leaving the upside open that if somebody really wants your company and really sees value, that they pay a premium. The premium has no basis in reality. It's
Yeah.
just a premium because I love you, Christine, and I would pay more, right? Like that's what we're trying to get them to be. So
Yeah.
like, stop ruining your own deal in a lot of aspects. Like that's why we need to be in the room. So Christine, you need to tell them how you can be in the room if they want to reach out to you. And what other things would you have as like advice to somebody who is listening to this and saying, you know what, maybe I now understand I need to prepare a little bit for in the future. If this happens, it would be a great, easy way to transact my company, but I got to be ready. How could they reach out to you, or what advice do you have?
So it's really easy to find me. My email address is christine@christinenicholson.co.uk. My web address is christinenicholson.co.uk, so the W's. And I'm all over LinkedIn. I would advise clients to do two things, ultimately three things, but here's really two things. First of all, actually go and get your business valued. Because you assigning your own value to it is usually ill-advised, because nobody cares about the sweat, stress, and sacrifice that you've put into it. So you really got to get a valuation based on the ideal buyer. And remember that valuation, the value of your business is more than just the valuation. It's all of the other factors as well, but at least start with the valuation. And I love the annual valuation approach, because I do this with some of my clients. So even if I've gone through the process and my client has decided not to sell, once they've been my client, I offer them a free valuation every single year. And I chase them up actually to say, it's time for your valuation, because it gets them really focused on what they're doing in their business.
Yes, so let's be clear. Christine is offering that. I am not offering that. So that is a great, I mean, seriously, that is a great way to kind of keep somebody engaged. But I usually have them that it's part of their process is to update it. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because one of the things I always say is that actually being exit ready is very different from selling your business. You need to be ready to sell, but it doesn't mean to say that you have to sell right now. So, and because I don't make money from a success fee, the great thing is that I can advise clients to do things that most brokers won't advise their clients to do, because the broker wants to get the money out really, really quickly. So I'm going to act in their client's best interest. So here's the second thing. And it's a thinking exercise, but it's just thinking about, if you weren't in your business and your business was sold, what would you be doing? So what is it that you're going to do when you've actually sold your business? And therefore, what does that look like? Because for some people, it will be literally, there you go, there's the keys, never cast a shadow over my door ever again. Once they're out, they're out. But for some of them, they want maybe to retire over a period of time. They want to tail out of the involvement of the business. They may even want an ambassador role. But I want you to really think about what that would look like, because most business owners sell their business as a reaction to other people's behavior, and they get what they're given. What I really want for most business owners when they sell or exit the ownership of their business is, I want you to get what you want for your life by design. And that takes some thinking. And then usually the first two steps of working with me is, I'll do your valuation and your saleability thing. You just give me some information and some money, and I'll do that. I do all that work. And then the next thing is really going to be you having a moment of complete selfishness where you really think about what it is that you want, because out of that will come the ideal buyer, and as a concept, and also it will be the ideal value of your business, either today or tomorrow at some point in the future. And then actually you get what you want, and you can go and get it, as opposed to reacting to what comes your way and then just getting what you are given. And none of us go into business to just be someone else's puppet. We go into business for ourselves, to have some kind of control, and also to get some freedom. And mostly that is freedom of choice.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times the negotiation process could go very poorly, and you could be negotiating with somebody and not be liking each other at the signing table, or you can negotiate from a position of power, of truth, of knowledge, and the confidence kind of flows from knowing your numbers, having a coordinated team, that you're not like, well, if you don't respond in 5 days, then the deal's off the table. Like, that's not actually a position of power. That's a position of desperation. And so I don't typically have to threaten to do anything, because if you have to threaten somebody to do something, they're not at the table at the same capacity with you. And you just have to recognize that they are not putting actions behind their words. And so I think that if you know what you're worth and you know what that value is, then you're going to stand, you don't even have to play poker. If somebody came to the door, it would just be like, yeah, sorry, that's not going to work. Because I would actually shift the question to, you're calling me to ask me what my price of my company is. Like, what would you give me?
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, well, I need to know more information. Exactly. Like, this isn't that is actually a horrible first question. Like, almost like if a buyer wants to kind of trick you in that fashion, because we had one recently and the buyer was going to the site visit. And I was like, well, I need to be there. And the owner's like, I got it. Now I know, but I prepped him. And I said, okay, if it goes this way, I said, he's coming to meet you for two things. He's either going to tell you he's going to price it lower than your lowest point, or he's going to try to negotiate some other aspect. I said, you got to listen to what he says, because he's going to give away why he's there. But if he talks about money, he's like, I'm not going to talk about money. I was like, I'm telling you, so he was ready. And it went off without a hitch. He's like, you know what, Melissa, he never mentioned money. And I was like, I know, because we already told him where he needed to be. And if he didn't approach it with he was going to be lower, what did he ask you? He said, well, he had this other issue, with his prior place. And, he had to figure out. So it was a timing issue, not a money issue. And, he just wanted to talk with them kind of situation. So in those types of situations, if you're not prepared for that, then absolutely we have to be in the room. But if you're going about it in a truthful, confident, I've disclosed everything possible. Now, this is a very simple deal, so don't get it confused. This is not how it would normally work, but it's a very, very simple, very simple deal, right? It's really a handshake, could be a handshake deal, but we're going about it kind of the proper way. That allows everybody to kind of de-escalate this intensity of the discussions and just be like, hey, okay, I have this issue. And what the guy wanted to say is, I'm hoping you're not going to sell it to anyone else. I really want this. I want to figure out what I can do to get this deal. Will you tell me what you want in the offer so that I can win? And he deferred. He said, no, you're going to need to talk to Melissa about that. But, we can talk about other things. So I think, again, just being prepared allows you to be nimble and to keep your mouth quiet when you don't need to offer any additional, you don't need to negotiate against yourself and offer information that could make the deal worse. So, well, I think this has been grand. Yeah. What else do you have to mention?
Well, just to finish, I think there's always 3 deals. This is really important. So there are 3 deals. There's the red deal, the yellow deal, and the green deal. So the red deal is no deal. And unfortunately, what happens with most sellers is they get an initial offer and then they go through the due diligence process. And because they haven't kept a track of exactly where they are and what they're doing, they've agreed to compromises along the way. And then by the time they actually get to signing the deal, they're signing a deal that if you told them on day one that this is what the deal is, it would have been a no deal. It's a red deal. And 75% of all sellers do that. And there's the green deal. This is the thing that if you thought about selling your business today, and I'm not talking just about the number, what would the ideal deal look like for you? And it covers all sorts of things. So remember that as a business owner, you own the shares. So what would the transition of shares look like? What's the price? Are we doing it all in one go? What's the timing of the cash? What's the commitment for you post deal? So, and all of that is the ideal deal is the green deal. It's you've got the ticks all the boxes that would make this the perfect deal. It's like the deal done by Disney where birds and butterflies fly around you as you're signing the thing with a scented pen. Okay. And then you've got the typical deal, which is your yellow deal, which is what are all the things that you are willing to make a compromise on? And when you've got those 3 deals laid out next to each other, it means that anytime during the negotiation you go anywhere near the red, you can go, oh, well, hold on a minute, I've already thought about that. And that is a deal breaker for me. Now, mostly people don't think about what the deal breakers are. They just think, oh, I'll compromise on that one thing, and then I'll compromise on this other thing, and then I'll compromise on this other thing. And then those 3 things have all added up to a red deal. Whereas if you've got them really well laid out, you can actually see where you are at any point in the deal negotiation, because it's never, ever, ever just about the money. And I will now take my own advice and shut up.
Well, this was great. I think that we covered so many areas, and I think that these are more tangible, emotional issues that we see sellers deal with and maybe are not talking about as often. And it really does come down to some of the negotiations. So being prepared isn't just a marketing spiel. It's really you have to consider the end in mind. And so regardless of where you are in the sale process, the world is changing very quickly. And I think the more you kind of accept the fact of why do you need to be in the room and you figure out why, you will then understand as a seller why you need other people in the room to protect you in this process. And so We're not asking to run your business. We're asking to run a business that we are very familiar with. And in order so that you don't hurt yourself along the way, it's advisable to work with a professional that understands it. So it's kind of a good guide through this process.
Yeah. I always say that if I'm not saving you 10 times the amount of money I'm charging you, I'm not doing my job. And believe me, there is so many opportunity for me to show you 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the value of my fee. As someone said to me the other day, actually, is that honestly, working with you, you saved my sanity and you cut my legal fees in half. And I said, which one was the most important? And he went, sanity, definitely sanity.
Yeah.
So
because like you said before, or it's going to be your second job. And if you do some pre-planning, you can allow the process to evolve in the way that it needs to be, which is negotiation is timing and leverage and patience. And so, Christine, I really appreciate you. And I think we'll have you back on to talk about more information. So this is a great one. Have a good weekend.
I really enjoyed it. And I don't often really focus on valuation. You're a rarity as to actually talking about this stuff, because ultimately it's really important. And actually psychologically, business owners need to understand this stuff before they go into any deal setting. So thank you. It's been a privilege to be able to talk about it.
Absolutely. It's been a joy. So we'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.